Good morning, everybody, and welcome to I&E's CCI Routing and Switching Advanced Technologies class version 5. For our introductory session, my name is Brian McGann. I'm a 10-year CCIE in Routing and Switching, Service Provider Security, Data Center, and a CCDE, and I will be your instructor for these class sessions. So then, what are we going to be talking about today? Mainly, we're going to be focusing on, first off, what is the Advanced Technologies class, and what is going to be the scope of the ultimate run that I'm going to be going through for this class. Now, for any of you that have seen the previous versions, most recently the version 4 Advanced Technologies class, you know that it's a very large scope. The previous class was over 90 hours of post-edit videos, so it was much longer when I was running the class live. And in general, the scope of the exam today is even much bigger than it was before. So it's going to be a very, very large and long scope that we're going to be going through with our different topics. But I'll talk about in a little bit more detail what you should expect to get out of the class, and then specifically the type of methodology that we're going to be applying for the class, and then also what the upcoming schedule is going to be in the near future. We're then going to spend some time talking about what actually changed between the CCI Routing and Switching version 4 blueprint and the version 5 blueprint in terms of what were the topics added, what were topics removed, and then how is that going to affect your preparation if you have already begun studying for the previous blueprint. We'll then talk about we'll talk about the topology changes as well, so not only the technical topics, but also how this affects the hardware that you would be using when you're preparing for the lab, both from a hardware platform point of view and a software platform point of view. And then we'll talk about how you can get access to the hardware either through rack rentals, or if you want to build your own topology, what are going to be the possible options that you have in order to do so. We'll then talk about just in general, how do you prepare for the lab? Because this certification, CCIE, is different than almost any other one on the market, simply because of the depth and the overall scope of the topics that are covered. So realistically, this is not something that you can say, hey, I've been in networking for 2 years and I'm going to get my CCIE within 3 months. It doesn't work like that. It has to be a very structured and long-term goal that you're working towards in order to achieve the CCIE. So we'll talk about, from just a high-level point of view, how do you want to do your preparation? What should be the order that you approach the topics? When do you go to reading of documentation or books, and when should you be working on the command line? Because there is, we'll see, a recommended methodology that we've been using for over the years, and it's been very successful for us internally, and a lot of customers and a lot of students have used it in the past and then been able to achieve their CCIEs as well. We'll also talk about where do you go from here. So after you go through the class, you attend a particular section, what's the next step? So where do you go in terms of actually going through the lab material to do the hands-on examples, and what are other resources that you can go through after the class? So first off then, what is exactly the Advanced Technologies class, and what are we going to be covering? Mainly the goal of this class is to learn a structured approach for not only configuring the technologies that are within the scope of CCIE, but also the verification and the troubleshooting. So you'll see that in the class, the actual format that we're going to be using is going to be a mix between technology explanations and then also live configuration examples. Now you'll see with the live examples that I'm going through, and this is probably going to be maybe 60 or 70% of the class or more, where we're going to be live on the command line looking at actually how to implement the technologies, and then what happens when you run into trouble and something doesn't work, what's the methodology that you can actually apply. So one of the things that I like to do personally for this class is to not prepare the examples, to not pre-script exactly what's going to happen, because when you go to the lab exam, ultimately you're not going to know what the questions are in advance, and you're not going to be able to say, this is my config template I'm going to build, I just get there and paste it in and congratulations, you're a CCIE. Okay, it doesn't work that way. So a lot of the times you'll run into unexpected results, and it's really beneficial for you to see when I run into those problems as an expert level engineer, how do I specifically apply my structured verification, my structured troubleshooting approach in order to ultimately solve the problem. So you'll see that if you've gone through other video series, maybe from some other vendors, this is one of the big differences, that everything I'm doing is actually live. I'm not just running a script that's configuring the routers. So we'll see that troubleshooting is actually part of the big fun for this class, that when we run into problems, we'll see live what actually happens and how do we fix those problems. Now, as a general prerequisite for class, I would recommend that you have just a basic working knowledge of the layer 2 protocols like Ethernet and some of the basic WAN protocols. A lot of the class is mainly going to be focusing on layer 3 technologies. So IPv4 routing, IPv6 routing, both with all of our IGPs, BGP, and then different VPN technologies like MPLS layer 2, layer 3 VPN, IPsec VPN, dynamic multipoint VPN. This is where the vast majority of the class is going to be focused. Now, you don't have to be an expert in these technologies. That's what the class is trying to get you towards. So as long as you know what is OSPF or what is MPLS, then you're pretty much ahead of the game. I will be talking about here specifically what are the resources that you might want to go through before attending the class for those particular sections, just so you can get a general basic background on what is that technology and what is the use case before we get into the actual implementation of it. And I can't stress this enough, we'll talk about this a little bit later in preparation strategy, that you have to know and you have to learn the foundations of the technologies before you go to apply them. You don't want to be learning a new topic by trying to configure it on the CLI and then looking at those results and then working backwards to try to figure out how it works. So there is going to be a lot of prerequisite reading, both in terms of regular books, either printed books or ebooks, and also a lot of documentation that I would recommend that you go through before you actually get to the implementation portion of these particular technologies. So as we get to the individual topics, of course, we'll go into more detail on them, and we'll talk about more specifically what should you read or what should you view before you get to that particular class session.